So I've been sitting around with some spreadsheets, calculators, and equations open trying to look at the Dueling Sword's current state of balance. And today, I just wanted to talk about it. What exactly has happened, what the actual problem is, and what has been proposed, and finally, what might be the way forward with the Dueling Sword. I also want this video to be a place for discussion. What are your thoughts of the Dueling Sword and its current performance? I come in with just one of several perspectives, so please comment below your thoughts. I think it's always good to get more perspectives when it comes to topics like this. By now, I'm sure pretty much everyone has seen or heard from other content creators that the Dueling Sword is, despite technically being nerfed, still one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful weapon in the game right now. So while Fatshark did drop the nerf on the effective numbers of the weapons themselves, what was probably not taken into consideration was just how much more power classes that could use the Dueling Sword had access to. The net result is sort of a 1 step forward, 3 steps back with the Dueling Sword balance. But just so we're all on the same page, these were the following changes that were made to the Dueling Swords, particularly its heavy thrusting attack. So, reading from the patch notes, heavy strike down stab, they reduced the finesse multiplier from 1.5 to 3 down to 1.2 to 2.4, that's a pretty sizable nerf. ADM versus unyielding from 1 to 0.8. ADM versus flak armor dropped from 0.8 to 0.7, and ADM versus carapace armor from 0.6 to 0.5. And the net result of these changes, specifically for carapace armor and crushers, is that the overall effective damage against them for headshots, crits, and critical headshots was reduced by about 27%. This is just the weapon itself with no other buffs, no other talents included. So on paper, this is a pretty sizable nerf and it needed to happen. But as someone who plays with numbers for fun to look for interesting ways to build things up, number changes must be made with more consideration if you want to balance something. And because of that, what Fatshark probably has to do next in order to rein in the Dueling Sword's upper ceiling of damage is to either nerf or remove Uncanny Strike. Seems like a drastic move, but allow me to illustrate just how busted Uncanny Strike is from the perspective of numbers. To show you this, I've tabulated some data on the table below, picking various different nodes and comparing the different damage output. So what this table tells us is that if you had to choose between a melee node that gave you 15% more damage or the 10% rending strikes node, both of these nodes are on the veteran tree, rending strikes would give you more damage. In this example, 15% more melee damage only represented about a 10% increase in your final damage output, taking into consideration the other talents that you have and the perks on your Dueling Sword. Meanwhile, 10% rending gave you a 16% boost. This is because rending strikes is improving the base damage output of the weapon, which essentially increases the value of every other damage buff applied to it. That's just from 10% rending. Uncanny Strikes can give you upwards of 120%, which technically still caps out at 100% rending. Check out the rending video if you want to learn more. So if you did nothing else but just have Uncanny Strikes on the Dueling Sword, you would increase its carapace base damage by around 53%. And because of how rending works with its overflow damage calculation, with full stacks of Uncanny Strike, you actually damage crushers more than unarmored units. From here, if you start stacking up talents, perks, and blessings, your damage is just going to go through the roof. And the more buffs available you have to the weapon, the more magnified this is going to be, which is exactly what we see today. Now, to be fair, Fatshark actually thought about this too. If you recall, some months ago, there was a leaked patch that mentioned Uncanny Strike being nerfed by having its effectiveness cut in half, specifically for the Dueling Sword. This nerf was proposed and not actually implemented yet, and it came out before we knew anything about the talent tree reworks and its impact. Looking back and knowing what we know today, even if this nerf came about, it would do next to nothing to the Dueling Sword. Why? Because even if you cut Uncanny Strike's effective buff by half to 60% rending at 5 stacks, knowing how the ADM calculations work, this would only result in a 2.5% damage drop from what we have today. Essentially nothing with the numbers that we're managing to pull off. Furthermore, Uncanny Strike's uptime and activation condition is just too easy given how powerful of an impact it has on the game. Just score weak spot hits, and for the next 3.5 seconds, you are increasing your base damage, which buffs all other damage multipliers you have in your build. Once you've built up the 5 stacks, and as long as you can maintain it, your time to kill for crushers going forward will be cut down significantly once you no longer have to build the stacks back up from scratch again. It is for these reasons that when compounded together, the Dueling Sword is now the most powerful weapon in the game paired with Uncanny Strike. So, would the removal of Uncanny Strike solve the problem? Yes and no. On one hand, doing so removes the easy and consistent 2-shots on crushers, and if you want to get a 2-shot, you'll need at least 1 crit or have even more investment in damage than is already shown. But on the other hand, still being able to 3-shot crushers reliably isn't exactly too terrible of a situation. It is still far and away the strongest melee weapon for bringing down crushers. So, with that in mind, what my proposal would be is to, number 1, further reduce the base ADM of Carapace from 0.5 to 0.4, and then remove Uncanny Strike entirely from the Dueling Sword and replace it with a new blessing that allows you to ramp up your rending power on single targets but not keep it. My concept blessing for this would be very similar to what Relentless Strikes does, but for rending. Maybe you get 30% per stack and stacks up to 2 times. This would mean you'll start getting the benefits from the 3rd hit onwards, and it takes 4 hits to fully benefit from the rending buff. The actual numbers and build-up stacks can change, but keeping it to 60% rending just about allows you to reach the ADM multiplier of 1 on its own, returning most of the power the Dueling Sword had with Uncanny Strike, but only through ramping up by hitting the same enemy and then not carrying it over to other targets. This would mean, with a reasonable amount of investment, you'd pretty consistently bring down damnation level crushers in about 4 or 5 hits depending on your class. Of course, if you min-max and get additional damage boosters like Focus Target, Skirmisher, and Agile Engagement, it will probably push the Dueling Sword into a reliable 3-shotting territory with the occasional 2-shots with critical weak spots and the Trust Blessing. But part of its strength comes from the fact that we are looking at it from the Veterans kit, which has a lot of passive damage nodes like Precision Strike and Desperado, where you don't even have to do anything to benefit from it. For Psykers and Zealots, I think the power limits would be a little different. Neither Zealots nor Psykers have any passive rending nor finesse talents that freely sets the bar for the Dueling Sword higher up than normal. They either need to build up stacks or build up peril, which either makes it more costly, like in terms of martyrdom needing more wounds, or takes more time to ramp up and requires maintenance, like Warp Rider or Scryer's Gaze. Alright, I'm going to close out the video here before I start rambling incoherently about unrelated balancing discussions, so I'll end with this. The Dueling Sword's prominence is really a symptom of the current overall state of balance of the game, which is a huge topic in of itself and warrants its own video. I think that being able to achieve a powerful weapon is part of committing to the investment of a build, and that if you pour everything to take it to the highest potential, you should be rewarded with a strong weapon to match. But sometimes the limits are pushed way too far, where player decision making is reduced down to, why would I use anything else? I love build crafting. I love being able to bring different loadouts, different weapons, and exploring different playstyles by mixing and matching different parts of our kit. To have any single weapon be the default because it's either too powerful compared to anything else, or because there's just no other alternative is something that Fatshark needs to address. Balancing a game is hard because there are so many things to consider, and it's very difficult to predict beforehand how cross interactions between blessings, perks, talents across different classes are going to react. It's also even more difficult to get right on the first try. That is why it is crucial that we get more frequent balance updates to bring weapons up to or tone them down when needed. This balance update is only the first pass at it, I understand, but I guess we'll need to see how else Fatshark is going to move forward when it comes to bringing weapons up to standard, and how they are going to handle future balancing. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Varlets.